You can come up with a bang-up story, your characters can hit all the right beats, but one false move in the editing room or a last-minute improv on the set and your Rotten Tomatoes score could drop faster than Geely's second week at the box office. Whether you love them or hate them, or mourn the loss of what could have been, ScreenRant will shine the light on these movies that underwent last-minute changes, for better or worse. And please click on the subscribe button to stay up to date on all things great and terrible on celluloid. But real quick, can you guess what feature film these emojis are showing? Stay tuned to the end of the video to find out.
Sorry guys, I didn't bring a sword.
Justice League. Poor Zack Snyder's taken a lot of heat for his angsty reboot of the DC universe. Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy was, well, dark, but Snyder took it to a whole nother level when he made his Man of Steel less of an endearing Boy Scout and more of a strong silent type with a god complex. Then came Batman v Superman with darker footage and actors that looked like their bodies have been enhanced by roids as much as their surroundings have been enhanced by CGI. Coming into Justice League, you're probably expecting more of the same. But due to some tragic personal circumstances, the director had to leave the project, and Marvel's #1 director/fanboy Joss Whedon stepped in for reshoots. Regardless of who you prefer, Whedon and Snyder's styles clash as harshly in this movie as Marvel and DC clash at the box office. The humor sticks out like a sore thumb, and yet it's not as sore as the CGI used to erase Henry Cavill's mustache. Called back for reshoots with Whedon, Cavill was required to keep his mustache that he'd grown for Mission Impossible 6. The special effects team tried their mightiest to digitally erase it from his face, but it's harder to convincingly cut out Henry Cavill's facial hair than it is to shave Superman himself.
Let the past die. Kill it.
The Last Jedi. A portion of fandom would prefer to follow Kylo Ren's advice and let The Last Jedi die, killing it if we have to. While it's not the perfect movie, is it really the worst Star Wars episode around?
I don't like sand. It's coarse, rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere.
I don't like sand.
But there were edits that removed some of its edge. When Luke agrees to train Rey, he promises her 3 lessons. However, in the finished film, she leaves Jedi Island before the 3rd class is in session. In an earlier cut, an entire sequence featured Rey seeing boats approach the island and fires lit along the shoreline. Luke tells Rey the men in the boat are raiders coming to pillage the caretakers of the island. Wanting to help, Rey goes to protect the island's fish nuns, but Luke argues that if she helps them now, the bandits will come back with a larger force. Ultimately, we learn that there was no danger. Luke lied to teach her that a Jedi doesn't always need to intervene in situations that might be out of their control. Although the inclusion of this scene would have made Luke colder than he appeared already, it added some more depth to Rey's training.
I risked my life instead of yours.
Lois, don't be insane. What?
Superman 2. After a long and stressful shoot filming most of Superman 1 and 2 back-to-back, director Richard Donner decided to focus on completing Superman 1 in time for its Christmas release in 1978. Donner argued for verisimilitude, pushing for a Superman story that felt true to the comics of the time and didn't get as jokey with the material as, say, the Adam West Batman TV show. As a result, Donner clashed with the notoriously cheap producers, and Superman the movie ran over budget, but it was released to overwhelmingly positive reviews and was a great success. Still, the producers thanklessly fired Donner and reshot most of his footage for Superman 2 under the directorship of Richard Lester. Although Superman 2 also received very positive reviews and Terrence Stamp's General Zod is a high point, Lester's emphasis on slapstick humor and cheaper production design makes for a sequel that hasn't aged as well as the original. Donner was given a second chance, releasing Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut, in 2006, comprised of lost footage from that original shoot, and a re-edited screen test between Christopher Reeve and Margot Kidder, in which Clark is forced to reveal his true identity. Unfortunately, the perfect version of Superman 2 lies somewhere between the Lester and Donner cuts.
Wait, what's that crap on your face? Is it wash off?
Hey, if you like a girl, can you light her a cigarette with your pinky? Because that would be real classy.
Suicide Squad. Yeah, the DC Cinematic Universe hasn't had the best luck when it's come to production schedules. The new take, where Suicide Squad's concerned, was the mammoth task of bringing a Justice League-esque mashup team of villains to life and to make them relatable.
What, we some kind of Suicide Squad?
We never really got to know these characters as antagonists in standalone movies, so we had to learn who they were in rushed introductions. But the sped-up nature of the movie probably stemmed from the rushed production and the rushed script. Director David Ayers and the studio released a statement where they said the film was still the director's original vision. Warner Brothers felt that his cut was too dark, even for their tastes. So they shipped the footage off to the company that put all their teasers together and had the movie re-edited. The result? A 2-hour, 20-minute long music video that's entertaining in 2-minute increments, dangerous in heavy doses, and only has a 26% Rotten Tomatoes score.
That was my profession. Ex-cop. Ex-Blade Runner.
Blade Runner. How can a classic like Blade Runner end up on this list of bombs, misfits, and flawed masterpieces? Well, the original cut of Ridley Scott's Android Tale was met with its own share of studio interference. Their biggest issues revolved around the film's bleak tone and the brilliant idea that Harrison Ford's Rick Deckard character just might be a replicant himself. They forced Harrison Ford to narrate events as they happened. The added lines are especially redundant because they usually just entail Deckard telling the audience what he's doing as he does it.
Skin jobs. That's what Bryant called replicants.
In later releases of the movie, Ridley Scott removed the narration and replaced the happier ending where Deckard and Rachel ride off into the sunset. Unlike most directors on troubled productions, Ridley Scott did eventually get to ride off into the sunset with his own perfected version of the movie.
The hell are you doing out here, Fred? No! No! No!
I Am Legend. In I Am Legend, New York is overrun by violent beings that chaotically rule the streets. Will Smith's character is attempting to survive in a land where he no longer belongs, and in his final confrontation with the vampires, he realizes they're not so different after all.
Look, I can save you! I can help you! You are sick, and I can help you!
Long story short, he learns that they simply wanted to save one of the creatures he'd been holding in captivity, and the very title, I Am Legend, stands for the fact that, to them, he is a legendary monster they hate and fear. It's a moment of mutual understanding from which the test audiences learned nothing. In fact, the people at the early screenings were so averse to the peaceful ending that it was reshot to show Smith firebombing the crap out of these creatures and basically riding off into the sunset to meet the other survivors.
Gotta say, it's fantastic.
Fantastic Four. When your own director slams your movie before it even comes out, you know you have problems. Director Josh Trank was a young Hollywood hotshot, fresh off the unexpected success of 2012's Chronicle. Sadly, the production seemed shaky from the start. Trank claimed to have problems with the studio's rushed schedule. And then there were the accusations from all parties of unprofessional behavior on the set. And writer Simon Kinberg was brought on to finish the movie. But the biggest problem in the final film is the uneven climax that was obviously reshot after initial production had wrapped. Kate Mara is wearing an out-of-place wig because her hair had been changed for a different role, and the whole ending has a more pulpy climax than you would expect based on the first 2/3 of the movie.
What guarantee do I have? Once you've taken it out, you'll destroy it.
Alien 3. The original Alien presented a fresh sci-fi spin on the slasher genre. Its thrilling sequel, Aliens, added further depth to Sigourney Weaver's Ripley. So naturally, when another sequel came around, the crew would take everything audiences loved about those two sci-fi classics and jettison them out into space. Alien 3's problem started in the scripting phase. They came up with a promising story, in which Ripley's ship lands on a prison planet and a stowaway alien terrorizes her and the convicts. Unfortunately, the studio never trusted the film's young director, a fresh nobody named David Fincher, who went on to direct flops like The Social Network, Gone Girl, and Fight Club. They edited down the character-building scenes, so we never really got to know many of the prisoners before they became food. Had the xenomorph alien spawn itself out of a dog. In space, no one can hear you scream, but in theaters, everyone can hear you sigh at clunky character development.
It's true, I chopped him up, but I didn't kill him!
He knows your life of crime.
Come to the police!
I think it's supper time.
Little Shop of Horrors. Look, it's a great, fun musical, but Little Shop of Horrors also had its ending changed last minute. Based on a campy cult classic and an off-Broadway musical, both earlier versions of Little Shop of Horrors have less than savory conclusions where the giant, soulful, man-eating plant grows and grows, eating Seymour, Audrey, and the rest of the cast, and eventually devouring all of humankind. Keeping the original ending, a finale was filmed with all the effects of a big-budget disaster flick. The visuals were amazing, but test audiences were rooting too too hard for the central couple. So director Frank Oz shot a much shorter and happier ending, in which Rick Moranis' Seymour electrocutes the bloodthirsty Audrey II, and the couple gets married and lives happily ever after, until we see a smaller Audrey II smirking into the camera from a nearby flower bed. It's satisfying, but it removes the insanely good practical effects and the classic closing song from the film that's otherwise incredibly faithful to the original musical.
There are crosses on the graves. There are crosses on the coffins. The church buried them, didn't they?
Exorcist: The Beginning. Exorcist: The Beginning tells the story of the first time Father Merrin faced off against the demon known as Pazuzu. Directed by Paul Schrader, writer of Taxi Driver, he completed exactly the type of film you would expect, a thoughtful and haunting thriller. Morgan Creek Productions was expecting a bit more in the over-the-top gore-fest department, so they ditched Schrader and hired Rennie Harlan for reshoots. Harlan, who had previously directed Cutthroat Island and Die Hard 2 Die Harder, isn't exactly known for his subtlety, but his version of the film got lambasted by critics. Morgan Creek Productions rehired Schrader to re-edit and reshoot his version, releasing it as Dominion, the prequel to The Exorcist. Even the writer of the original Exorcist, William Peter Blatty, called it classy and elegant. If only every demonic possession could be so refined.
Please don't look at me like that.
Why not?
It makes me feel uncomfortable.
Sorry, milady.
I don't like sound.
Whether through misfortune or meddling, certain films can't stand under the weight of big budgets and bigger expectations. What do you think of these 10 popular movies ruined by last-minute changes? Oh, and before we go, here's the answer for the emoji question. Did you guess the correct title? Be sure to let us know, and thanks for watching.